Thank you, Geraint.
Starting from verse 57. The time came for Elizabeth to have her baby, and she gave birth to a son. Her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had been very kind to her. They shared her joy. On the 8th day, they came to have the child circumcised. They were going to name him Zechariah, like his father. But his mother spoke up. No, she said, he must be called John. They said to her, no one amongst your relatives has that name. Then they motioned to his father. They wanted to find out what he would like to name the child. He asked for something to write on, and then he wrote, his name is John. Everyone was amazed. Right away, Zechariah could speak again. Right away, he praised God. All his neighbors were filled with fear and wonder. Throughout Judea's hill country, people were talking about all these things. Everyone who heard this wondered about it. And because the Lord was with John, they asked, what is this child going to be? John's father Zechariah was filled with the Holy Spirit. He prophesied, give praise to the Lord, the God of Israel. He has come to his people and purchased their freedom. He has acted with great power and has saved us. He did it for those who are from the family line of his servant David. Long ago, holy prophets said he would do it. He has saved us from our enemies. We are rescued from all who hate us. He has been kind to our people of long ago. He has remembered his holy covenant. He has made a promise to our father Abraham. He promised to save us from our enemies. Then we could serve him without fear. He wants us to be holy and godly as long as we live. And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High God. You will go ahead of the Lord to prepare a way for him. You will tell his people how they can be saved. You will tell them that their sins can be forgiven. All of that will happen because your God, our God, is tender and caring. His kindness will bring the rising sun to us from heaven. It will shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death. It will guide our feet on the path of peace. The child grew up, and his spirit became strong. He lived in the desert until he appeared openly to Israel.
So we're thinking about peace. Peace on earth. Can we have peace on earth? And we've got this amazing story here. Before we hear about the birth of Jesus, we hear about the birth of John. And it's quite an interesting story about Zechariah and what happens to him. He's not so sure about what God says to him, and so he's not able to speak for quite some time. But then we hear that a baby boy is born to Elizabeth, and the Lord has shown her great mercy, and all of her neighbors and relatives, they share in her joy, which is wonderful. But then there's an interesting thing around the name. Because Elizabeth says, oh, we're going to call him John. And everyone's like, why? Why would you call him John? Nowadays, if someone calls a child John, it's like a very common name. But for them, it was not in the family. You would always call your child after someone in the family. There'd be a connection. There'd be a reason. And we all do this now. Those who have children, there's always a reason for the name that you give them, right? Sometimes it's just it's a nice sounding name. It might be a family name. It might be the meaning of the name and what goes behind it. But everyone after this event, and they call him John, and Zechariah affirms that yes, he's going to be called John, and all of a sudden, after not being able to speak for a really long time, his tongue is freed and he's able to speak. And then he goes and he shares that amazing song of praise. But the people say, everyone who heard this wondered about it. They wondered about it. It's curious. What is going on? Asking, what then is this child going to be? For the Lord's hand was with him. Something about the name and the child and the circumstances that piqued people's curiosity about who this child is going to be. So what's in a name? My name's Mark. Does anyone know what the name Mark means? So I was named, my parents named me Mark, is really after the gospel writer, the Gospel of Mark. It's a biblical name, right? And it reminds, and my parents liked it, I guess. But if you track it back, it was a really common Roman name. Does anyone know what it means? As we're talking about peace on earth, it means warlike. So as we're thinking today about peace, how can we live in peace? And Elizabeth and Zechariah, they name their child John for a particular reason. It's something that I've had to wrestle with a little bit. It's like the meaning and purpose of my name, if you track it right back, is warlike. Why? And even within myself, why do I experience moments and feelings? Why do these things come up inside me where I get agitated, or I get annoyed, I get angry even by certain events that happen around me or within me? And even having testosterone, one of my questions for God, when if I arrive at the pearly gates, whatever, if I get that moment to, God, what is going on here? We all have those burning questions, right? One of mine is, what's the deal with testosterone? Because testosterone can be quite an aggressive, cool. And even in that little intro video that we watched, someone's response was, as long as there's men. Yeah? So, that's a question for me. What's the place of my name, warlike, and what is the place in the world? What is a redeemed version like? I don't know. So what are the possible paths of peace? How do we live in peace when there seems to be this bubbling up constantly of war? And as I mentioned, even this week, Friday morning, it feels like it's an overflow, perhaps, of a conflict that is on the other side of the world, but because of people's connections and relationships and what people believe, it's overflowed down Glen Ira Road. How can we walk the path of peace? Well, what are some possible paths? These are some answers. I mean, as you were thinking about it and talking, do you think peace is possible? Can I get a show of hands? If you just had to answer yes or no, is peace possible on earth? Would you say yes? Show of hands. Is peace possible on earth? Okay. Show of hands for no. Peace is not possible. Well, that's an even split, I reckon. That is down the middle. Is peace even possible? Well, these are some answers for possible paths of peace. I don't know what you're thinking. If you were answering yes, peace is possible, how do you think that would actually come about? Some about a controlled release of violence and aggression. So there are even cultures that have practices where once a year people will come together as a bit of a festival, and instead of fighting tribe against tribe throughout the year, they all just get it out in one moment, one day of the year, and just have a big punch on one day. But it seems to actually work. They spend the rest of the year in harmony, not fighting each other. And some people legitimately advocate for this, that there needs to be a release. You know, there's things, there's conflict that happens throughout the year, there's difficulty and tension, and there's limited resources, and so people fight over those limited resources, and you need to have a controlled release of it. One of the comments about what happened on Friday and the synagogue that was destroyed with fire, one of the comments was, why can't we just live and let live? Live and let live. So this is an idea where, we can be this kind of people and culturally express ourselves this way. We can believe these things and we can live like this, and we'll let you live with a very different belief system, different practices, but you go and do your thing. Yeah, why can't we live and let live? But essentially, that's segregation. It is putting up a wall, putting up boundaries, and it's essentially saying we can't live together. So we have to live and let live separately. Pax Romana is the Roman peace. So the period of time that we have this Bible reading in existed during what's known as the Roman peace. It was an extended period of time where the Roman Empire was in control, and in some ways it was a really peaceful, prosperous time. The economy boomed. They expanded. There was scientific discoveries. There was a lot of wealth that occurred during this time. But how did that come about? Who held the Roman peace? How was the Roman peace held? It was held by the sword. And everyone knew it. Yes, we can have peace. We'll live as long as, you don't cross the soldiers. You don't cross the emperor. You don't step out of line, because violent enforcement would come. And for the people living in Israel at the time, for Jesus, his disciples, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, everyone who was living there, they knew that they were under oppression. This peace, this enforced peace, was oppressive. They couldn't live, they couldn't worship, they couldn't exist as God was calling them to be. Other people will think about, we need to start with an inner peace. It doesn't matter what's happening on the outside. Let's just look for peace. It's always fun to research on these topics and the things that you come across. Do you know there's a Modern War Institute? Anyway, there is. And Professor Christopher Blattman writes that from gang wars to ethnic violence and from civil conflicts to world wars, the same 5 reasons underlie conflict at every level. War happens when a society or its leader is unaccountable, ideological, uncertain, biased, or unreliable. Interesting. Someone's researched into this. Why does war and conflict happen? because a leader or a society is no longer accountable to the people, no longer accountable to any set of principles. They become ideological. They've got a certain agenda that they are working towards. Things become uncertain, so they don't have a clear picture of how the world will unfold, and so they might enter into war not realizing the outcomes of those things. They might be biased. They might not actually see the truth. They might be predetermined or pre-committed to some ideas. Or there's a lack of, so unreliable means there's a lack of commitment. They're not sure. Things are changing, and so they're not sure about others' commitment to peace. And so sometimes a nation will preempt a rising nation and go to war early to not lose their position. It's a little bit sad, actually, because I look at those things and none of them are going anywhere. They're just things that we have in the world. They're things that we have in life. Uncertainty is almost guaranteed in life. There are always things that are going to be changing. There are going to be, kingdoms rising and kingdoms falling. There will always be bias. There will always be people who will find themselves and pull, power centralized around themselves into what is going on. So what do we need? There is a whole lot of beautiful phrases in what Zechariah sings. Zechariah's song is an amazing song of hope, and one of my favorite phrases in here is around heaven's sunrise. Heaven has a sunrise, that people walking and living in darkness, there will be a sunrise. The light will come up. There will be a dawn of light coming from heaven. Peace on earth for earthly people in a fallen world. We can't do it on our own. There won't be peace on earth left to our own devices. We can try and we can try and we can try and we'll fail. We need heaven's sunrise. And the last line of Zechariah's song, to guide our feet into the path of peace. To guide our feet into the path of peace. We will not walk in peace. We will not know the end of war and conflict. We will not be able to live in harmony, peace being shalom. This is not just the absence of war, the absence of conflict. Shalom, true peace, God's peace is working together in harmony. It's a coming together. It's not segregating people out. It is living with good order. People have their place. They contribute. They share. They work together. God's peace, God's idea, God's view of peace is to come together and to work together in unity. But we will not have it without heaven's sunrise, without light and love from heaven. Now that's why Zechariah's song is so beautiful. The first half of the song there is around God's sunrise coming and what God is going to do, what God has done, what he is doing. And what does he bring? He brings rescue. For people living under the hand of their enemies, he brings rescue so that they can serve God, worship God without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. This is what God brings, salvation and rescue from war, from conflict, from oppression, so people can live without fear. And then the second half of the song is to do with John the Baptist. And Zechariah sees in his own son greatness because of what God is going to do. Now, this is not just, I know, like every father thinks their child is like the most amazing kid ever born, right? But this is more than that. He sees God's plans in a unique and special, in a glorious way, coming through his own son. These extraordinary circumstances. His own son, John, who will be called John the Baptist, will be called a prophet of the Most High because he will go on before the Lord. He goes on before Jesus to prepare the way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun, heaven's sunrise, will come to us, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace. We can't do it on our own. We need God to send, God to come. And so John the Baptist begins that journey as the messenger, preparing the way for Jesus, the Prince of Peace, who comes for our salvation. So may you walk the path of peace, not in your own strength, not in your own wisdom, not in your own knowledge, but walk with Jesus, the Prince of Peace. His ways are not our ways. So walk with him. Amen. Let's